certain heroes of mine, and one person who has been a hero of mine for a long time is Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. And I have his picture in my office here. He's one that defended freedom with strength and eloquence. Now, just to give you an idea of what type of man Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain was, he was born with a speech impediment, but even with a speech impediment, he learned to be able to speak 9 different languages. 9 languages. Who speaks 9 languages? But he did. And at Bowdoin College, he became a professor. He taught philosophy, divinity, and many other subjects. He was a devout Christian, and he did not believe that any Christian should ever be in favor of slavery. He actually taught that it was the Christian's job to fight against slavery. Now, he believed during the Civil War that it was very important for people that had titles, like being a professor, to actually fight in the war, because too often, I don't know if you know this or not, but the rich people during the Civil War, they could pay a certain amount of money to a poor person to take their spot. You could do that back then. And that practice he thought was terrible. He said it was very important for everyone, no matter your office, to fight. And he actually asked the leadership board at Bowdoin College to give him a sabbatical so he could take a break from being a professor and go fight in war. And they said no. We don't want one of our professors getting involved in that engagement. Your sabbaticals decline. Well, then Chamberlain, he went back and he said, well, he requested a second sabbatical, but this time he said, I want to take a sabbatical because I want to go to Europe and I want to practice my different languages I know. Well, they liked that idea, so they granted him a sabbatical for that. But he wasn't really being truthful with them. After he was granted his sabbatical, he went to the governor of Maine and he volunteered his services to fight. And the governor of Maine appointed him second in charge of the 20th Maine Regiment. Now, by the time of Gettysburg, Chamberlain was the lieutenant colonel. He was the one in charge of the 20th Maine Division. Now, before the 20th Maine Division, there was a regiment before it called the 2nd Maine Division. Now, this division, because of all the casualties that had been taking place, the 2nd Maine Division had been disbanded and sent home. But see, there was 120 men in the 2nd Maine Division that signed 3-year commitments. But see, they thought they were signing 3-year commitments to fight for the 2nd Maine with Maine men. So when the division was disbanded, but see, they wanted to go home. But then the Union Army was like, well, not so fast. You're still committed to serve. We're just going to put you somewhere else. And they were like, no, we're not going to fight for someone else. We wanted to fight with Maine people. We wanted to fight with the 2nd Maine. And so they were labeled as, they were accused of committing mutiny, because they refused to fight. Well, General Meade, who was the new commander of the Union Army at this time, they were going through commanders very quickly. General Meade was the commander. He thought that the 2nd Maine, the 120 people of that division, if they were going to fight with anybody, their best chance would be to get them to the 20th Maine, where Chamberlain was the leader. So Chamberlain, and keep this in mind, he only has 250 men. So one day, on the way to Gettysburg, he gets a lot of 120 mutineers, and they say, well, do with these men whatever you want. They're your responsibility now. Now, just how in the world can 250 men guard 120 men while also being on 2 days of hard march and then fight? And how can you do all that while you're trying to guard 120 men? You can't. Chamberlain knew that the best course of action was to try to get these men to join his unit, to join his regiment, and to fight with him. And so he got them together, and he gave them a speech. And this speech resulted in all, but in the end, only 3 of them refused not to fight. So, in the end, they decided to join him. And it was a good thing because, where he was located, if he hadn't had those extra men, the Confederacy could have won the battle of Gettysburg. But I wanted to go over his speech. And we know what he said in large part from his own diaries, because I think it screams of American values here. When he was facing these 120 mutineers that he wanted to join his regiment, this is what he said. He said, "You know what we're doing here. But if you're going to fight alongside us, there's a few things I want you to know. This regiment was formed last fall back in Maine. There was 1,000 of us then. There's not 300 of us now. But what's left is choice. Some of us volunteered to fight for the Union. Some came in mainly because we were bored at home and this looked like it might be fun. Some came because we were ashamed not to. Many of us came because it was the right thing to do." This is a different kind of army. If you look at history, you'll see men fight for pay or loot or some other type of thing. Men fight for land, or because the king makes them, or because they like killing. But see, we're here for something new. This hasn't happened much in the history of the world. We're an army going to set other men free. America should be free ground, not divided by a line, free state and slave state. All of it, from here to the Pacific Ocean. In America, no man should have to bow. No man born to royalty. Here we judge you by what you do, not by who your father was. Here's a place to build a home. It's not the land. There's always more land. It's the idea that we all have value. You and me, we all have value. We're worth more than the dirt. And in the end, that's what we're fighting for, each other. That's what he said. And I like his speech because I think it really gets to the core of America. And if I would ask you to name attributes that make our country great, I don't know how many people would actually say love. But I maintain that I think it's love that holds a democracy together. If you think about it, a communist country or a socialist country, they tax you to death, or they coerce you to make you do the right thing. But in a capitalistic democracy, where you're not taxed 50%, most people, you're not coerced to do the right thing, you have to choose to do the right thing most of the time. You have to love each other. And some people will say, well, look at our country today. They'll be thinking, they'll be hearing what I'm saying, and they'll watch the news, and they'll say, but where's the love? Well, one of the reasons why our country is so divisive today is because we are not loving each other like we should. But see, people talk about divisiveness all the time, and people make the really crazy statement that this is the most divisive time in our country's history. No, it's not. It's not. The Civil War was a time when a war was actually started. But see, even in that time, Chamberlain, his love, people like him, their love won out. And with the division that we face, or the trials that we're going to face in the future, it's important that love wins out in the end. Because in the end, like he said, what we're fighting for is each other. My family, we're not going to have a very good future if those around us also aren't taken care of. Democracy depends on loving others. That's why today I thought it would be fitting since I maintain that love is a fabric that holds democracy together, I thought it was fitting to preach on Jesus, the second greatest commandment. He said in the second like it in Matthew 22:39, love your neighbor as yourself. The two great commandments, love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and strength, and love your neighbor yourself. Jesus said, and what's following is extremely important. He said, all the law and all the prophets hang on these two commandments. Basically, he's saying the whole Bible, the morality and the ethical teaching of the Bible, hangs on these two commandments. Love God and love your neighbor. And you know, people twist the second greatest commandment, and sometimes it irritates me. They'll say, well, in order to love your neighbor, you have to love yourself. Friends, that's not what Jesus is trying to get at. He's not telling you to love yourself here. He's assuming that you're already loving yourself. The second greatest commandment is clearly, directly about loving your neighbor. Some people, some preachers, they'll try to point the arrow back at you and say, oh, what Jesus is really saying is you got to love yourself, because to love yourself, you got to love others. That's not the case. That's not what he's saying here. He's already assuming that we love each other, that we love ourselves. This is about other people. It's not about ourselves. He's telling we need to love our neighbors. Now looking at the second greatest commandment, to love your neighbors yourself, the key word here is neighbor. He doesn't say love your family as yourself, love your church members as yourself. He says love your neighbor as yourself. Who's your neighbor? Well, he answers that question too. A man in Luke 10:29 asked Jesus, who is my neighbor? And Jesus replied with what would become a very famous parable. He said there was once a man going from Jerusalem to Jericho. A gang of robbers got a hold of him, they stole from him and beat him severely, leaving him half dead. When a priest who was traveling on the same road saw this man lying half dead, he walked on by. A priest walked on by. So then a Levite happened to be walking on the same road. He also saw this man beat and lying there, and likewise he passed on by. Finally, a Samaritan came along the road, and he saw this man. And the Samaritan was the only one who took pity on the man by caring for his wounds. They put the man on a donkey, took him up to the inn, and cared for him further. The next day, before leaving, he took it upon himself to give the innkeeper 2 silver coins, so he would continue to take care of the wounded man. And he even told the innkeeper that when he returned, he would reimburse him for any extra costs that he had, any extra expenses in caring for the man. I mean, if there's ever someone that fit the description of going beyond what was expected, this Samaritan did it. Jesus uses this illustration for 2 points. First, it illustrates who our neighbors are. Our neighbors are everyone. Everyone. Secondly, it illustrates the lengths that we're expected to go as Christians for our neighbors. This man from Samaria, he didn't know this injured man. They were not next door neighbors. But he helped him still. And likewise, we're called to help people that we don't even know. Jesus used the Samaritan as the hero of the story. And, this was like a direct, like the Jews listening to this, they were like being stabbed, when they heard this, because they viewed the Samaritans, and I'm not exaggerating here, they viewed the Samaritans as second-class citizens, below second-class citizens. By using a Samaritan as being the true neighbor and a priest and a Levite as really failing from being neighborly at all or loving at all, but propping the Samaritan up, Jesus is telling us that we need to love everyone, even those that we find challenging to love. Now, Jody and I, we went to Reedsville. There was a secondhand shop there. I forget the name of this shop, but it was crazy filled with stuff. I mean, it was packed. And I couldn't go through everything, but I went through and I saw a sign, like a sign you put on like your wall. And I I was caught by what it said. It said, and I need to read it or I'll get the words mixed up. It said, when I least deserve to be loved is when I need to be loved the most. And I just thought about that for a second. When I least deserve to be loved is when I need to be loved the most. That's true. Jesus doesn't tell us to like our neighbors. He doesn't tell us to simply be friendly to our neighbors. He doesn't tell us just to be acquainted with our neighbors. Jesus tells us to have agape love for our neighbors. Agape love. That means self-sacrificial love. Not mutual love. Not, well, we'll love you if you love us back. Agape love. Self-sacrificial love for our neighbors. Do you see how the bar is raised for Christians? I mean, that goes beyond just being nice and friendly. Jesus calls us to love everyone. Because he later defines neighbor, he defines neighbor as everyone with self-sacrificial love. Now, it's easy to love those that love us back. Very easy to do that. The problem for many of us is to love people that we don't know, or to love those that don't love us back. But we're called to love everybody. Everybody. Even those that don't think highly of us. You know, Matthew 5:43, Jesus said, you've heard it said that love your neighbors and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of the Father in heaven. And Jesus goes on to say something striking in verse 46. Matthew 5:46, he says, if you love those who love you, what reward do you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? Loving our neighbors as ourselves. Part of it is even loving those that we don't know. Part of it is loving those that we're at odds with. Loving, self-sacrificial love for someone that we're at odds with. That is extremely challenging. But that's what Jesus commands. You know, the Bible is not always that complicated. It's difficult to follow sometimes, but it's not complicated most of the time. You know, a biblical character, to me, that knew what true love was about, was Ruth. Ruth's mother-in-law was Naomi. And over time, Naomi had lost her husband. She lost both of her sons. Naomi was without food, since the reason she wanted to go back to Judah was because the Lord was providing food for the people there. Therefore, Naomi was without the most important people in her life, her husband, her children, and she was also hungry. And she even thought the Lord was against her. Because in Ruth 1:13 she states, it's more bitter for me than you because the Lord's hand has gone against me. Naomi said that to Ruth, her daughter-in-law. Now the reader can feel how desperate Naomi is by her belief that God who she trusted all her life, had turned against her. She reached a breaking point. A lot of times people reach breaking points. That's common. This was Naomi's breaking point. And I don't know how we can really blame her with the trials that she suffered. She was in great need of companionship, and she was in great need of true love. And Ruth provided that for her. And even when Naomi tried to dissuade Ruth from coming with her, Ruth replied, don't urge me to turn back. Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. And in verse 18, when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped trying to urge her not to follow her. Now, I think Ruth is a great example of someone loving her friend as herself. Now, some people might think, look, Ruth had nowhere else to turn, so she followed Naomi for her own self-interest as well. However, I'm not sure that argument, that point of view really holds that much weight. Because in chapter 2 of Ruth, Boaz tells Ruth what a wonderful thing she has done. Well, if she did it out of her own self-interest, it wouldn't have been a wonderful thing. And he also tells her that everything that she's done he compliments everything that she's done for Naomi, and how even she loved her mother and father. So she had a mother and father still alive that she left. So even Boaz sees how Ruth took the harder road, the more difficult road, because it was the right thing to do. That's what loving each other is all about, taking the harder road, because it's the right thing to do. And in closing, I'd like to share a story that I read, and it was from Chicken Soup for a Veteran Soul. This is where that story is from. And I had to condense the story, or it would be here even longer, but I tried to keep as much that it made sense. The story's name is Luther's Lumber. The story goes, this morning Luther was on a little cafe by the post office waiting for the mail to be put up. Fred was sitting across from him in the booth. They were discussing World War II, which was still going on in the Pacific Theater. Recruitment posters lined the walls. Today, Luther seemed depressed and asked Fred and Fred asked him what was bothering him. You down in the dumps today? Fred asked Luther. No, I can't see what's bothering you. You're a veteran of the war, but this war you came through without a scratch. You got a beautiful baby. You have a beautiful wife. You got a good job. What's the problem? And Luther replied, well, Jenny's mother's in bad shape. We're going to have to take her in, and with the baby coming, we just don't have the room in our house. You can't build a room on? Fred asked. Well, there's no lumber available right now, Luther responded. I've tried here, I've tried Mount Vernon, I've tried Springfield and Joplin, and there won't be any more shipments in until the end of the war, and who knows how long that will be. Have you tried Will's Sawmill? Yeah, but he just sells oak, and it's green. The baby would be here in August, and we can't wait for the lumber to dry out, and you can't build a whole room out of oak. Well, you wouldn't want to, Fred said. I reckon the mail's up. So the two young men left the cafe and went to the post office. They retrieved the mail and went their separate ways. And the next morning, Fred again drove his pickup into town for mail, and when he reached the cafe, Luther was ahead of him. He saw Luther, and Fred asked if he found any lumber. Luther replied, no, and I asked everybody at work, and nobody knows of any. I don't know what we'll do. And Fred answered, I found some lumber for you. You did? Where? Well, it's a fellow I know. He'll let you have it for free because you're a veteran, but he doesn't want you to know who he is. So I'll have to haul it in for you each day. It's good lumber, fir and pine, cut different lengths, but it has nails in it, but that's not a problem. I tell you what, you get the foundation poured, and I'll bring you the wood each day, and I'll help you build on the room, and it'll get done before the baby gets here. So Luther, he laid the foundation, and the next week Fred came in. Every night he brought new lumber, new wood every night, and they built a new room. Fred even brought what was needed for a ceiling for the new room. Now it was common for people back then, to donate things to veterans and to help veterans with things. So when someone was willing to give Luther this wood, anonymously, that wasn't a big deal. Things like that happened all the time. So Luther, he didn't search for his donor. He figured if he didn't want to be found, he wouldn't be found. At supper one evening, Luther told his wife Jenny that he would like to do something nice for Fred, because Fred supplied, brought the lumber, he helped him build the house, and Jenny recommended buying a couple lawn chairs because Fred and his wife, they like to sit out in their front yard and outdoor lawn chairs. So they bought a couple of lawn chairs, and they brought it to Fred's house. Now, when he got to Fred's farm, no one was home. They knocked on the door, and Fred and Maggie, his wife, had gone to Springfield shopping. That's okay, he said. I'll just put them in his garage in case it rains. Luther drove around the house into the driveway that led to the garage, but the garage was gone. There was no garage. Only the foundation remained to show where it had been. Luther put the chairs on the front porch, drove away, tears in his eyes. The two men, at the time that this was written, which was years ago, they were in their mid-70s. They're probably deceased now. But they were in their mid-70s, and they never talked about this incident. Why? Because they didn't have to. They knew what was done. Jesus says in Luke 16:10, whoever is faithful in small matters will be faithful in large ones. Whoever is dishonest in small matters will be dishonest in large ones. Now, Jesus is directly talking about our integrity as far as it's related to our handling of finances, money. But I believe that same concept is true for love. It's easy to get behind really big projects, big things, and show our love or our compassion for someone. But those day-to-day matters, the love we show the people we run into on a daily basis, that's just as important. As is the difference between mutual love and self-sacrificial love. Let us pray and let us ready our minds and our hearts and our souls for communion, where Jesus Christ, he illustrated to us what self-sacrificial love truly is about.